Chris Landry, welcome back in the game. I hope you're doing well, sir.
Good, Ryan. How are you, man?
A very busy day. Very, very busy day today.
Yes.
But it's fun, though, because you get to see a lot of these recruits and get to see the classes, and everybody's, prancing around claiming the number one class. And certainly Georgia had a big day, but Nick Saban said they fulfilled a lot of needs here in Tuscaloosa.
Well, I think they did. There's still a lot of quality in Alabama's class. I think people pay too much attention to where the amount of stars behind a player's name and where they're ranked overall. Recruiting classes are about filling needs, usually a year in advance at least, but filling needs where they are in your roster, and it's about how you develop the players too, and those are really important. And finding the guys that really fit your program, and it's not the same. While you see a lot of players being recruited by a lot of programs, sometimes the fit is not as good at one place or the other. There's no doubt that Georgia has got more big-time players in terms of the best players of the country. They got more of them than anybody in the country this year. And so I know that that's probably an uneasy feeling in Tuscaloosa and among folks that say, well, we barely beat them in the championship game, and now they've got the number one class in the country. And what does this mean? Well, what it simply means is Georgia is an elite program now. Now, they haven't done it where Alabama's done it at the top of the mountain and winning championships, but Georgia is certainly in a short term with a guy that certainly learned it from Nick Saban. He's gone back home in a state where he got a lot of players for Alabama. Alabama not only loses a guy like that, but now it loses them to Georgia, and it's kind of a perfect storm, if you will. And he's doing a phenomenal job, and I would expect Georgia to continue to be an elite program, but they're going to have to prove it, over a more sustained period of time on the field. To some degree, Ryan, like Clemson has done. Clemson's recruiting at an elite level and winning at an elite level. To maybe a lesser degree, behind Alabama, Georgia, and Clemson would be in Ohio State that recruits very well. And but I think that's kind of where we are in college football, and the fact that some people are talking about somebody other than Alabama is maybe a little bit surprising to some, but that's just kind of the reality of it. I don't think it's a sign that Alabama's slipping, other than maybe some programs are doing a good job and maybe getting in that stratosphere where the tide has been.
Chris, can you give us some insight? And I certainly want to work our scouting report and maybe ask you about a couple of players. Certainly, we want people to go to the website, and you've got all the different players from each of the different schools in your breakdown. But let me ask you, let's go back. Give us some insight into what coaches, when they begin a recruiting process, what kind of starts and how do they begin the conversation with their big board and saying, hey, this is what we got to go out and get, and this is what we really, really need?
Well, now it's starting earlier and earlier because, like right now with the early signing day, today's, big news day, but the reality is, about 70% of the recruiting efforts over the past month or so has been focusing on 2019 because there's just less numbers to be able to get the news of the day of getting players might have been big, but the numbers are not nearly as good. So the time and effort into closing on the guys that would have been signed today that were signed in December, that time was focusing on the next year. So it has changed a lot over the years in which you have recruiting areas, but in a staff like Alabama's and now Georgia's and other big-time programs, you've got analysts that basically gather information from high school coaches from different sources to where you get information, and you try to get verified information through camps and through a lot of these, 7-on-7 camps. You try to get verification of the height, weight, and speed, but you get information from each of the schools. There's not a school in Alabama, a school around the South, that somebody associated with the Alabama program doesn't scour and make sure that they talk to the coaches, talk to the opposing coaches in each district to determine who are the players that in this class that you think we should look at. And then you begin to form a lot of background information, a database on every player. Then you basically train just as we did, and I helped Nick do this when he went to Michigan State, first of all, is you put together and you train young coaching analysts, scouting analysts on your staff to evaluate players on film to a certain standard, putting a grade on them. And there are critical factors and position specifics for each school. And I've got that up on the website, by the way. You can go and look at it. It has each position. So now you go through a process and you grade. Then you have large numbers, and it filters up. And there's a lot of services out there that can get basically what you read on the Internet, mostly is information gathering. So if they find out that Clemson and Georgia and Alabama and USC and LSU and Notre Dame recruiting these guys, they pretty much know that other people think they're pretty good or they wouldn't be recruiting them. So you gather information, and it filters up. It's like the reverse hourglass. And as it gets up to different defensive analysts, offensive analysts that will then look at players, then it goes to the position coach. Then the coordinator gets involved, and Nick Saban looks at everybody that they offer. But Nick Saban can't look at 8,000 players. You know, he'll look at a finite number that's filtered through that meets the standard that's been set. And then there's the other process that goes into it, the personal character evaluation, the academic evaluation. All of those things are vetted so that you get a finite number that are the guys you're going to set your recruiting with. Here's who we want to recruit, and here's how we stack the board. And unlike, say, my draft board, where you can draft anyone, depending on your slot, in recruiting you can go after all of them. You then start to gauge your chances of getting them, and you have to figure out backup plans to where if you don't get these guys, where would you go? And you have to start looking at numbers. You have to anticipate where your rosters are going to need fulfillment because you're going to lose players early. You're going to look at guys and maybe encourage them to go somewhere else because they don't really fit in. They're not. Then okay, so here's what we're going to have numbers-wise. Alabama can all offer 23 this year. That's what their number is. Well, you'll look at it. But in a case of most cases where you want to sign 23, you sign 23. But let's say you end up missing out on some guys. Instead of just signing that last one or two, you might go under your number and try to backload where you've got more quality in the next year. So it is about a numbers game, but to answer your question, once you filter up all the players that fit your criteria from a personal character, football character, academic, and a football standard, then you begin to recruit them and recruit them very hard and sell on them. I think the big story of today, one of the big stories was LSU flipping Patrick Surtain, who I actually know Patrick Sr., scouted Patrick Sr. Makes me feel old that his son is already going into college, but that's the way it is today. And, talking with him, over the past few weeks, I clearly felt like that, the advantage that you have at Alabama with Nick Saban is you've got so much success. That now this is a kid, for example, that for 2.5 years has basically been an LSU guy. Corey Raymond is practically almost adopted him. That's the secondary coach at LSU. Okay, and it's just, this kid's about as locked into LSU as you're going to get. Except you start looking at it, and you bring a kid like that. Here's a top kid that you want. Maybe you may missed a couple of other guys. Now you bring him in. Certainly haven't done as much work on recruiting him as LSU did, but you bring him to Alabama, and oh, by the way, you bring him in on the visit where it happens to coincide with the national championship parade, and that kid sees every kid that Nick Saban has ever recruited has ended up with at least one championship. That sells itself. Now, it's not just selling an idea. It's selling reality. It's the best program. So in essence, recruiting only works as good as your production on the field. It's like any product. If you got a crappy product and nobody wants it, you can be the greatest salesman in the world. But if you've got the best product because you've developed the best product, which is Alabama football, then it's an easier sell because it's not easy to create that product, but it's easier to be able to, you don't have to sit there and spin anybody's heads. You sit there and say, here's what we can do for you. And you bring them on campus, and they sit down, and those parents get to see one of the best nutrition centers you're ever going to see. This is how we do it. This is how we feed your kids. This is what we do. You bring in the academic people. You bring in the people that are going to be in this discipline of study. You're going to go to the weight room program, the training room program. You leave there thinking, my God, it's the Taj Mahal of training facilities, doctors, nutrition, academic advisors. You're thinking, God, this is it is something that sells itself, and I think that's in a nutshell how it works. But the most important thing is you've got to have success on the field. Georgia can't sell this class on everything if they didn't get to the national championship game and playing Alabama so well. That's a big sell for them, where Alabama's been able to sell a longer period of history and a lot of things that they can do to help you beyond football, even if you don't make the NFL. No, by the way, you come here, your chances are if we're recruiting you and we're developing you, you're going to get your shot in the NFL. You're going to get your shot, and it's going to be up to you and good fortune and good health, but you're going to get your shot. And if you don't make it, then here's the plan in our support program that if you want to get into accounting or dental or whatever, here's a support system we're going to have to help you achieve success in that area outside of football. That, in a nutshell, is how you do it from nuts to bolts, and I'm kind of going on and on. I apologize, but that's kind of how that process works, and it's about offering the right guys, though, and they go after the best and have a backup plan so that they need help in the secondary. They're going to sign 4 guys, and they ended up doing it.
Don't apologize, because we're picking your brain for looking for the way that it's the way the sausage is made behind the scenes. That's what we're looking for. Let me ask you, in looking at your grading scale, I thought it was just fascinating just looking at that part when you go through. Where would Patrick Surtain rank on this scale? And let me ask you, maybe for a scouting report, certainly we'll invite people to connect with the website where you can read about all those guys. But one of the new ones, as you already mentioned, Patrick Surtain Jr.
He'd be in that highest grade level in what we'd call and it'll make sense when people go see it, but the blues, the reds, purples, oranges, by the way, that is the similar, the color codes go in the same order in evaluating NFL players. So it gives you an idea. Blues are the best, then reds, then purples. And they're basically kind of 2 categories of blues. And the darkest blue would be the guy that would be an elite player, outstanding, that could come in, play day one, depending on circumstances, health and adjustment, but could come in as a football player and could start day one at an elite program. And that's what Patrick Surtain is. He could come in, and it would not surprise me if he's lining up opening week and starting for Alabama. He's that good. Now, is he going to be ready? Is he going to pick everything up as quick? I don't see any reason why not, but I don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. And, injuries or, things can derail that, Ryan. But and you can't foresee all of that. Well, not God, of course. But you're looking at the skill set, the intangibles. He is one of the top players I've seen. I look at about 500 players around the country, and it's based upon the college coaches that I do work with. I don't have time to look at 5,000 guys and still do my NFL work and college work. So I look at the guys that they think are the best, and then I look at those. And he would be in the handful of one of the 5 or 6 best players in the country at any position that I saw this year.
Let me ask you, and you've got a list right here of and I'm not very good with his first name, Ayabi Noma, defensive end, 6'6", 223 pounds. I know that's part of that you can go and you want to look at a sample. Now, LandryFootball.com is obviously a subscription base, and you want to get every single scouting report. You can go and see a sample right there, LandryFootball.com, and you can find the Alabama tab, professional scouting reports for the Alabama recruiting class. But you've got a Noma listed here in the breakdown.
Yes, he would be in that same category as Surtain in terms of grade. He is at elite level. He is a very athletic, wiry 6'6", needs to fill out his frame, and that's what Scott Cochran and his staff will do. This guy has the foot twitch, athleticism, bend, change of direction, explosiveness to be that type of stand-up rusher who can put his hands down on the ground in nickel and be very effective. Quite frankly, at the defensive end, outside backer position, that's where he's going to be and kind of grow in and fill to that. But he's got that ability to develop a really good rusher. And again, this is part of the thing that Nick and every coach around the country does, and I don't get to do this with the high school kids, more with the college kids into the NFL, is, they do a lot of work on the kids' work ethic and attitude, and they try to get the right. You can get the best looking guys if they're kind of lazy and they just don't, that we see a lot of those kids are a bust. Most of the kids that played in the Super Bowl last week, a lot of those guys were 3 stars by these ranking systems, but they develop and they work hard. So you really can't figure out a lot of this, but my feeling is they like this kid and think that he has the type of work ethic to be great. He's from St. Francis Academy, obviously out of Baltimore, and I think this kid has a chance to be an elite pass rusher. And it wouldn't surprise me if he had some role in nickel early, but again, that depends upon health and development, but I think he's again one of the handful of 6 or 8 best players I saw in the country this year on tape.
I've got 2 minutes. I want to spend the last minute talking about the website. Let me ask you, Coach Saban identified with us earlier. He said that a big problem that they have to face is people reminding recruits, if you go to Tuscaloosa, you're not going to be able to get on the field because of depth chart. Obviously, he identified that in a press conference and said that was a problem, one of the things that they're facing out there on the recruiting trail.
Hey, let me tell you a little secret. I always worried when I was a recruiting coordinator and a kid was asking a lot about the depth chart, well, that was such a turnoff. Because you know what that told me? This guy was worried about who else was there, not worried about what he can do. I want the guy that comes in and says, oh, yeah, great, he's there, good. Then that's who's going to be behind me when I start. That's the attitude that I want. So my comeback to that is always, I'm going to recruit the best player. It's kind of like, what Georgia was able to do with the Fields at quarterback. It's what Alabama has to do with running backs and every other position. You want to come here. It's not easy. Okay, if you want easy, go somewhere else. You want to come here. You put in the work. You put in the commitment. Look at the rings. Look at the players in the NFL. It is a factory of if you come in and do your part, you're guaranteed success. So I want that guy. I want that guy to be challenged. So other people use it. That's fine. Because you know what that does for me? And I tell Nick and everybody, that's great. That helps to identify who you truly want or not. Because the toughest part, the easiest part is evaluating what a guy looks on film. The tough part is to figure out what makes them tick. And if they're worried about who they're going to compete against, thanks, but no thanks. I'm going to move on.